Hello everybody, and welcome back to another review. As I previously said, I'd like to talk more about IEMs now. I'd like to talk more about other audio gear besides full-size headphones. So thank you for joining me on this new path. Thanks to Unique Melody and Micah, otherwise known as Glass Monkey, on HeadFi for organizing this review tour of the Mentor V3 by Unique Melody. I had this for 2 weeks and then I sent it off to the next person. So let's start with the build quality. As with this sort of shell, there's a bit of a substantial feel to this IEM. There's no cheap plastic here at all. And the little bass knob, which you'll see right here, has ridges so they can be adjusted easier, but I do think that an incremental adjustment with each turn might have been a better addition, because this has too much freedom. You can, especially if you're trying to find your place in the middle, you can either have it all the way on or off. But if you want to have that sweet spot in the middle for your tastes, it's going to be a little tough because you have to really, it could even slip out of place because there's nothing holding it in place in the middle. And I do think they should have had a little notch, little levels, maybe 5 or 6 different adjustments that you could have, so you could count them down and then you could do it properly. So a quick word on aesthetics. I've always found it really neat how IEMs have this intricate design work. The Mentor is no exception, of course, although I wasn't really sure at first when I took it out because I needed a good look under my studio lights to understand what was really going on, because in dull lighting it looked kind of like black or just dark navy blue, but it has a really translucent ink blue shell with swirls of lilac in a web-like pattern. It's not the flashiest IEM out there, but I find its rather demure nature quite the looker. So the bass knobs I talked about earlier are the most noticeable feature that the Mentor possesses aesthetically, because they're present right on the shells themselves. The premise isn't unlike stuff I found on full-size headphones. You close off a tiny vent or leave it open to tune the bass a little bit. However, I found the mid-range to change in a manner I didn't really prefer when the vent was fully closed. It's quite a minor adjustment, but I did feel like the IEM sounded more natural tonally with it left open, although you lose a little bit of the visceral bass impact. I don't want to say the mid-range was dipped or anything when you close it off all the way, but it did intrude on my favorite aspect of this IEM, which I'll get to later. It does come with 3 cables that are identical in look and feel. They all have this rather teal kind of color. Now they all have the proprietary 4-pin connectors that the Mentor V3 uses. I believe the Mason V3 also uses those, but they're all terminated differently. You've got one with the 4.4 balance connector, which is, I've heard, the future. You've got one which is a 3.5mm single-ended connection, and then you've got one which is terminated in a 2.5mm TRRS balance connection. So this ensures that you'll have options for whatever portable source you have, as it has all bases covered. But the actual feel of the cables was that they seemed a bit plastic, not as pliable as I would have liked, but they're in no means low quality or bad quality. But my main gripe with these cables and connectors are that they're proprietary. The reason for this is probably because they have this implementation where they have a separate braided silver side of the cable and a separate braided copper side of the cable, so you can switch in between just per your preferences if you dig that sort of thing. I understand that there are those who will appreciate this feature, and by all means it is a huge selling point on their advertising, but it doesn't supersede the ability, to me personally, to have easily available aftermarket options. So finally, you'll get a bunch of Comply Premium Comfort Plus tips. The IEMs themselves are in a chrome case that doesn't quite lend itself to any reasonable outdoor use or travel use because it's quite heavy. It's more of a put your IEMs away on the shelf kind of thing. So moving on to the sound. So the Mentor avoids one of the issues that I've had in the past with other balanced armature in-ear monitors, which is of decay. So the abrupt decay, which I've heard in other IEMs, was something that I found quite difficult to overlook. For example, the cymbals in a jazz track like Nefertiti by Miles Davis, the Mentor V3 manages to let each ring of the cymbals ring out to a desirable amount instead of choking it, leading to a more resolving and natural feeling. The cymbal hits don't feel too thin either because the bell and chime are very much present and whole, which I did quite enjoy. I believe that's centered in the lower treble. The soundstage width is very wide, specifically with the little knob relieved all the way. So imaging is decent, but the tracks will give you somewhat of a hard panned sense in some places. You'll have the hard pan left, hard pan right, and then the center stage. Balanced armature timbre is something I've struggled with in the past as well, as someone who is primarily a listener of full-size dynamic driver headphones. But I did find that the Mentor does succeed in reproducing instruments with a certain lifelike quality. This is highly dependent on source, however, and I found that the Hi-B R6's ability to reproduce pianos was not lost in the Mentor. In fact, it was kind of enhanced. But acoustic guitars may seem a little thin. However, as the Mentor does not emphasize the lower mid-range as much as you would believe if you read that this is the more musical counterpart to the Mason V3, which is more of a reference tuning. Now, I found the bass to have a very speedy and snake-like quality to it, which is very apparent with fast playing and movements across a bass guitar's fretboard. That being said, the impact of the kick drums and the like did not really hold much weight compared to, I guess, a dynamic driver. It's very clean to my ears, however, and extends decently low. The extension can be very slightly held by fastening the notches shut, but I found any increase did not really warrant the increase in mid-range capabilities that accompanied doing so. The attack and decay are very well done too, with an abrupt introduction with a soft lingering afterwards that does not overstay its welcome. But this is no basshead IEM in terms of weight in the region, just because it's quite controlled and somewhat subdued instead. So I've not measured these IEMs, so I can't tell you if the lower mid-range is indeed dipped or not. I do hear some thinness with acoustic guitars, but at the same time I hear a good amount of body with male vocals, so I'm not quite sure. The mid-range overall is my favorite part of this IEM, because I wanted to test out its clarity during intensity, so I threw on Flying Whales by Gojira, and I took in the experience. So the growled vocals stood very nicely on top of the mix that was blazing on all fronts. The distorted electric guitars that had a good amount of body and chug, they stood well separated in their own camps on the far left and far right channel, and didn't let up as the mix got more and more hectic. So a switch to a better mixed and mastered Enter Sandman by Metallica further proved that this is a very capable IEM for rock and metal music. And one reason for that is separation between tracks that the Mentor is able to reveal. Again, I must preface this by saying that this is very source dependent in this regard, because my own M1S wasn't nearly as adept at bringing this out as a Hi-B R6 was. Simply put, it presents the tracks in a way that lets the listener hear them in a more distinct fashion than, for example, an IEM in the lower price range or lower capabilities, like my Noble Sage. It was the first aspect of the Mentor V3 that I noticed upon initial listen in the chorus of Dreams by Fleetwood Mac, just how full and defined the vocal track sounded. The treble for me is ideal, and the trickiest part in my assessment of these sorts of IEMs is the treble, to be honest, because I'm a little bit sensitive to balanced armature treble. I've heard many reference IEMs in the past which kind of hit me too hard, and I find them to be a bit too hot for my liking. But this one, while it's not a dark sounding IEM by any means, it does sound very, very well extended to my ears without going to harshness. But that also depends on what you're listening to, and it depends on your source, but it also depends, most importantly, on the mastering and mixing of the track that you are listening to, because bad tracks will definitely sound awful on these. It's not a very forgiving IEM in that regard, is what I'm trying to say. So it doesn't feel... There's a good amount of snap in the snare hits and ringing in the higher percussive details. It doesn't feel choked, but I could see a fan of the certain sort of reference sound, feeling that these might be a little bit too rolled off for them. They might want a bit more air. But that's an assumption on my part. I'm not really sure. I haven't talked to anybody else who has these IEMs. So moving on, what I like about the treble is its ability to clearly reproduce defined sounds like fret buzz, slides, cymbal crashes, and chimes and high synth parts. As mentioned before, I do appreciate that there isn't an abrupt decay in this region that would have choked snare hits or cymbal crashes. Its ability to reproduce an entire bell sound in Moonchild by King Crimson and decay it naturally is a pretty big positive mark in my book. It's one of my favorite tracks to listen to on the Mentor simply because of how all the percussion sounds. So the final point I'd like to make in describing the sound of the Mentor V3 is that it has a good amount of texture. So Eddie Hazel's impassioned guitar solo in Funkadelic's Maggot Brain is a good indication of this, as the abrasive wail is accurately reproduced and not overly smooth or toned down at all. There is some grit to this IEM, which I do enjoy, as the opposite would make for a rather boring and by the numbers experience, but I'm not quite sure if those who are looking for a more mellower sound would agree with this IEM as much as I do. So source scaling. The two digital audio players that I currently possess sounded very distinct in the Mentor, more so than any other IEM in my possession. Number one is the M1S, which is a capable product in the $100 to $150 range that is an upgrade over most smartphones, but it's still lacking in detail retrieval, however, and has a boxed-in sound when compared to higher-end offerings, with rather lackluster separation and low-level detail retrieval. DAP number two is the Hi-B R6, which checked all the boxes that the own stumbles at, but has an output impedance of 10 ohms. So I haven't quite heard this affect other IEMs quite so much, but I did hear it affect the bass of the Mentor V3 slightly. All of the regions are very well defined and a good match, particularly in detail retrieval, staging, and separation, but the Ohm presents a fuller bass capability than the Hi-B can match. But ultimately, what I want to say in this regard is if you are somebody with a good source, you will definitely appreciate it with the Mentor V3. So, at $2,099, the Mentor V3 is the most expensive in-ear monitor that I've had an extended period of time to listen to. My takeaway is that these are indeed, to me anyways, has some really great improvements over my humble noble Sage. The nuance to the sound, the mid-range reproduction, and the comfortable highs made this a very easy but detailed listen to me. The gripes that I have with the balanced armature timbre were dulled quite a bit as well. With that being said, I'm not in the audience for this IEM as a primarily full-size headphones guy. I do need more time with more higher-end in-ear monitors to really gain context into how this sits in the market, because I'm really sad to say to you guys right now that I can't give you that answer currently. All I know is that it sounds good to me for the reasons I just said. So thank you for watching this review, and I'll check you guys out in the next one. Peace.